26th, 2010. That's the day that we adopted Natalia. We had no idea what we were dealing with. She's not 6.
She was an adult. You could just tell.
She threatened to stab my sons. I definitely didn't feel safe around Natalia.
You've adopted a kid, and now they're trying to kill you. I mean, it's the stuff of a horror movie.
She tried to poison and kill my wife. One night, I opened my eyes, and Natalia is standing at the foot of the bed with a knife in her hand. She's tiny. These stories don't make sense.
You just don't know. Drew Barnett's.
I'm charged with 2 counts of child neglect. Is that correct?
Maybe there's more than one villain in this story. Michael accuses Christine of beating Natalia.
My mom is definitely not 100% innocent.
Bye-bye.
Be very good if you just quit talking. We're in deep, deep trouble.
Well, kicking down the stairs, we said we're not going to say, right? Oh, still have my microphone on.
The documentary creators from Discovery Channel seemingly bungled their portrayal of Natalia's narrative, treating her age as an enigmatic puzzle or a trivial matter, while providing Michael Barnett, accused of abandonment and deceit, a stage to propagate his assertions. In an ironic twist, they handed Barnett enough leeway to potentially entangle himself, which admittedly did provide some peculiar satisfaction. Yet, the spectacle of Barnett lamenting his perceived woes, all while a supposedly defenseless child was left in dire straits, was nothing short of distasteful. Offering him a soapbox for his narrative was unwarranted. One can only hope his credibility is forever tarnished and tranquility remains elusive for him. It felt as if the documentary dragged us through a 4-episode saga dangling the enigma of Natalia's age like a carrot, only to leave the narrative thread dangling. The presentation of truth seemed almost like an afterthought, hastily tacked on. Entering the series without any prior insight into the case, my husband and I were led down a narrative path that painted Natalia as a sinister adult masquerading as an innocent child. The balance seemed off, with scant attention given to the possibility of her actually being a child. Yet an inordinate focus was placed on portraying Michael as unequivocally unhinged. The narrative spun by the documentary hinted at deceit on Natalia's part, with undue emphasis on aspects like her physical development or her interactions in a psychiatric facility. The portrayal aimed to sensationalize, painting a picture more lurid than factual, overshadowing the reality of her just being a child. People have asked me why there aren't any visuals or screen transitions in my videos. I tell them I consider my videos more like audio podcasts. After the first 15 seconds to 2 minutes of visuals, it's time to put on your headphones or turn the volume high and go about doing your dishes, laundry, or walks in your neighborhood by yourself or with your doggy, etc. My content is more audio-driven than video-driven. Staring at the screen for long periods of time is not good for your eyes anyway. So let's keep going. The documentary's fixation on Natalia's age struck me as peculiarly off-key, considering the possibility that Natalia, given her unique cognitive profile, might not have had a clear grasp of her own age. Age in her context might not hold the conventional significance, her understanding aligning more with that of a child. Even if the hands of time pointed to her being older, it didn't automatically cast her as a crafty imposter. Chances are she was navigating a maze of confusion more intricate than anyone else's. The documentary blew the whistle on her concealing her menstrual cycle, but isn't it plausible that she was grappling with understanding it herself? Reflecting on my own experiences as a precocious 10-year-old, I too kept such matters under wraps, bewildered by the changes and stifled by the societal hush around the subject. It baffled me how the documentary failed to entertain the notion that Natalia's reality could be a complex blend of truths. Imagine a child plucked from Ukraine, shuttled through the turbulence of multiple failed adoptions. Her grasp on the continuum of time could be virtually non-existent. if she was constantly reassured of her being 6 years old, despite the calendar's protest, it's hardly likely she'd have an epiphany about overstaying her age bracket. Her mental framework probably didn't accommodate a wow, I've been six for a decade now realization. Reflecting as an American, it's pivotal to acknowledge that our historical ledger of record keeping hasn't always been pristine. Discrepancies in vital records were more common than not so long ago. Furthermore, the scars of abuse and neglect tend to distort a child's perception of time and memory. It's a documented phenomenon that traumatic experiences, such as sexual assault, can precipitate early puberty in children. This could very well be a puzzle piece in Natalia's intricate mosaic of life, among numerous other indicators pointing towards a past marred by hardship. It's worth pondering whether young children have an innate sense of their age or if they simply mirror the age narrative set by adults around them. It's quite conceivable to persuade a young child that their age is other than reality. Given Natalia's journey shuttled between myriad caretakers, it wouldn't be astonishing if she encountered abuse at some juncture. The scenario likely morphed into a real-life version of the telephone game, with each caregiver narrating their own rendition of Natalia's backstory. Such a mosaic of narratives could easily muddle her understanding, leading to her piecing together her history from fragments of recounted tales rather than genuine memories. This patchwork of stories, not her lived experiences, might be the source of any inconsistencies in her accounts. It indeed resonates that Natalia's pre-Barnett experiences remain a murky chapter, and the foster care realm is notorious for its potential to disorient and traumatize. Adding to that, the Barnett's actions further warped her reality, thrusting her into the limelight in a most unsettling manner. One can only hope that she's now receiving the support and therapeutic care she deserves. The ease with which the public initially swallowed the Barnett narrative is truly astonishing and disheartening. This leads us to ponder further, were the allegations of her flirting or repeatedly visiting a neighbor's apartment misinterpretations or even darker, a result of manipulation? If so, it's conceivable that Natalia, ensnared in a web of manipulation, may have been led to believe she was an adult, thus striving to navigate the world as one. Reports of her being overly interested in her neighbors' comings and goings might reflect a deep-seated longing for familial connection and a fear of solitude. The mysteries abound, from the dynamics with her subsequent adoptive family to the unfolding of her life post-adoption. How did her new family come into the picture, decipher her complex history, and what was her journey? How has it been since then? The narrative is riddled with unanswered questions, each layer adding to the enigma that is Natalia's life. In retrospect, Michael's demeanor during the interview struck me as peculiarly off-kilter, his eyes often having a glossy sheen and his responses seeming overly dramatic, traits not uncommon in someone grappling with addiction. His presence was electric, almost theatrically so, marked by grandiose gestures and constant fidgeting, painting a picture of someone on edge. As I dive back into the series with the arrival of a second season, the realization hits anew. She was indeed a child, a fact that the initial season's conclusion managed to blur. The latest season unfolds with a poignancy that's hard to shake off. The documentary's compilation of footage, both fresh and archival, is nothing short of astounding. It's as if they've laid out a narrative trap that only the most oblivious would willingly step into. Their meticulous documentation has shone a piercing light on the obscured facets of her abuse, dispelling the fog of confusion that led some to believe, quite bafflingly, that she was an adult. The series has inadvertently or not done a monumental service in unearthing these buried truths. The documentary's narrative direction in hindsight could have been vastly different. With such compelling footage at their disposal, the creators missed an opportunity to pivot the storyline, spotlighting the harrowing plight of Natalia and the sinister deceit of her guardians. They could have crafted a narrative akin to the gripping tales of Tiger King, showcasing the stark realities of manipulation and abuse. What grates on me the most is Michael's self-portrayal as a mere collateral victim in Christine's narrative, conveniently sidestepping his own complicity in Natalia's ordeal. His stance is unwavering in my eyes, an abdication of responsibility and an absence of remorse that's profoundly unsettling. His culpability mirrors that of his partner, each as reprehensible as the other. And then there's the audacity of his self-victimization claims, trivializing the grave issue of sexual abuse by equating it with his grievances over marital intimacy. It's perplexing, the mental gymnastics one must perform to face oneself in the mirror each day under such a delusional guise of righteousness. It seems quite plausible that the framing of Michael's narrative was a strategic maneuver to deflect attention from potential allegations of child sexual abuse. The behaviors attributed to Natalia as forms of torture often bear an uncanny resemblance to those observed in CSA survivors. Your insight hit the mark, ID Network. If Natalia's interactions with adults and her peers carried a sexual undertone, it screams a glaring signal, possibly indicating that she endured SA, perhaps on multiple occasions. Indeed, I don't discount the possibility that Michael might have been on the receiving end of emotional abuse from Christine, grappling with the aftermath and PTSD. Her manipulative and controlling demeanor seems palpable. Yet this doesn't absolve him of his role in Natalia's narrative. Despite the challenges and fear, a parent's duty is to be the bulwark of their child. Michael's failure to shield Natalia from harm, irrespective of the threats and manipulation at play, is tantamount to complicity in the abuse. Not perpetrating the physical abuse himself doesn't mitigate his role. His inaction and failure to protect Natalia weigh equally in the scales of guilt. Indeed, let's not overlook the profound tribulations Michael faced as he gravely narrated in the documentary, casting himself as a forlorn martyr of sexual abuse, a dire saga of surviving the unimaginable ordeal of a partner's fluctuating libido, a tale of heroism and endurance surely worthy of an epic ballad that he had to sometimes face his wife telling him no to sex just like any other man. Your sentiments echo a familiar frustration. Navigating through Michael's narrative in the documentary felt like wading through a swamp of theatrics and fabrications. His on-screen presence, overwhelmingly more prevalent than Natalia's, was like a relentless itch, prompting a reflex to hit the mute button or avert one's gaze. His emanations over personal grievances, juxtaposed against his passive role in abandoning a vulnerable child in a precarious environment, were almost too ludicrous to digest. The documentary, ostensibly a tapestry of storytelling, often veered uncomfortably close to a vaudeville show, spotlighting Michael's self-serving narratives, rendering the whole production an ill-conceived spectacle that did little justice to Natalia's harrowing journey. The documentary seemed to lavish an inordinate amount of screen time on Michael, almost as if he were the centerpiece of a peculiar self-celebration. His smug references to the legal principle of double jeopardy and the spectacle of his legal entourage added layers of distaste to the already murky narrative. For those who shared my disillusionment with the curious case of Natalia Grace, branding it as a sensationalist mishmash with scant regard for concrete evidence or credible voices to support Natalia, there's an alternative narrative out there. It's a compilation that not only sheds light on the events through expert insights, but also includes commentary from Natalia's actual healthcare providers. in stark contrast to the original series, which seems more like a gathering of unsubstantiated claims and dramatic storytelling. This alternative presentation offers a more grounded and informative exploration of the events. Devouring the series was a harrowing marathon, unveiling one of the most heinous instances of mistreatment I've ever encountered. The thought of leaving an 8-year-old to fend for herself is beyond my grasp. I found myself moved to tears repeatedly. Watching Michael's tearful claims of victimhood to Natalia was infuriating. The decision of the producers to include such a narrative is equally infuriating. The entire saga stirred a deep-seated anger within me. The adoption seemed less about altruism and more a bid for social acclaim, the noble act of rescuing a disabled child from an orphanage. Yet they seemed taken aback when confronted with the reality that Natalia was a genuine child, replete with genuine emotions and challenges. There's a disturbing trend where some perceive adopted children as perpetual debtors of gratitude, as if any deviation from perpetual thankfulness is indicative of a flaw in the child. It's a mindset that's both reductive and profoundly unfair. Their disdain for the reality of her disability was glaring. Outbursts over her inability to match their pace during walks were commonplace. Christine's decision to involve the police over a simple stumble during a walk was particularly jarring, and when confronted with the baselessness of her call, she concocted an outlandish narrative about Natalia attempting to push her into an electric fence. The perplexing part is how they evaded legal repercussions. By maneuvering the legal system to reclassify Natalia as an adult, they sidestepped the child abuse allegations. It's baffling given the visual evidence from photos and videos that strongly suggested her youthfulness. To leave a young girl alone in an apartment, her sustenance dependent on food stamps, is unimaginable. They adeptly navigated through significant systemic gaps, effectively using them as shields for their actions. Their narrative initially seemed to chase a knight in shining armor fantasy, hoping to unveil their own version of a flawless, endearing Ukrainian orphan Annie. But reality's complexity tarnished that illusion. Mrs. Mann pointedly noted the underlying motives driving the Barnetts to concoct such an elaborate and bewildering narrative, bringing it to the media's forefront. Instead of simply returning Natalia, a decision that, while harsh, would have been less convoluted than their subsequent actions, they chose a different path. And the reason? Christine Barnett's public image as a paragon of motherhood, nurtured through global tours with her prodigious son, and a memoir celebrating her maternal prowess, was at stake. The puzzle pieces of their psychological makeup begin to align, painting a clearer picture of their actions once this aspect is factored into the equation. Absolutely, for individuals entrenched in their own narrative of infallibility, acknowledging personal imperfections is tantamount to heresy. It's a classic case of deflection. It's not a flaw in my character, it's a sinister plot by someone else. So they embark on a desperate campaign to uphold their facade of perfection, recasting the child not as a child, but as a malevolent adult bent on their destruction. Their actions bear the hallmarks of a disturbing parental pattern, where one child is singled out as the scapegoat, allowing the parents to maintain the illusion of competence and kindness with the others. It's a deceptive veneer of familial normalcy, with one child unfairly branded as the problematic one. The narrative often overlooks the staggering frequency with which Natalia found herself at the mercy of others' actions. It's a harrowing list: the abandonment by the family in New Hampshire, the dubious intentions of the Barnetts, the disinterest or complicity of neighbors, the legal system's decision to prematurely age her, and the judiciary's refusal to reconsider her age during Michael's case, denying her the chance to reclaim her rightful youth. The sheer volume of times Natalia was subjected to injustice is nothing short of mind-boggling. To add insult to injury, she was extracted from the educational environment she thrived in. The disruption didn't just end there. She was torn away from a previous foster family where she had found warmth, love, and a sibling like bond, only to be thrust into the tumultuous world of the Barnetts. Concerning Natalia's interactions within the Barnett household, it's curious whether her reported hygiene issues could be attributed to a lack of accessible bathroom facilities. Was their home adapted to meet the specific needs of a person with dwarfism? It's notable that other families like the DePauls made significant modifications such as stair lifts. Did the Barnetts take similar steps to ensure Natalia's environment was accommodating? The entire saga is indeed bewildering. The Barnetts should have faced more severe consequences. If their conviction about her being an adult was so steadfast, why didn't they simply return her instead of navigating through an elaborate labyrinth to label her as an adult? Then to leave a mature, disabled individual to survive independently seems nonsensical. Was their entire motive just a vindictive "I told you so"? Adding to the absurdity is the fact that she continued to grow physically. Last time I checked, adults don't typically undergo growth spurts. It's yet another glaring inconsistency in a tale already riddled with perplexing twists and turns. Revisiting the narrative, it's the judge, medical professionals, and the state authorities who truly merit scrutiny for sanctioning such a debacle. The underlying motive of the Barnetts seemed to be a quest for freedom from parental obligations, especially as they prepared to relocate to Canada for their son's academic pursuits. The adoption agreement initially stipulated that Natalia would undergo specialized surgeries to address her physical conditions. Yet the prospect of bearing the financial burden and the inconvenience of post-surgery care seemed to clash with the plans of the Barnetts. Consequently, they wove a complex web of deceit, spinning a tale so far-fetched it could captivate the most gullible of audiences, all in a bid to wash their hands off their responsibilities. Their abandonment was absolute, showing a chilling indifference to her fate, whether she survived, thrived, suffered, or even fell prey to the most sinister of threats. The baffling discrepancy between the doctor's assessment of Natalia as a child grounded in the medical evidence of her growth plates and the judge's decision to recalibrate her age based on doctors' opinions cited by the Barnetts raises serious questions. It's perplexing how such a critical decision bypassed the need for thorough medical verification. The omission of such a crucial step in the judicial process borders on maleficence. As I reach the conclusion of Season 1 on HBO, my frustration with Michael's role in the narrative intensifies. His complicity in the abuse is glaringly apparent, and the judge's actions or lack thereof suggest an alarming level of negligence or worse, complicity. It's a narrative that leaves one grappling with a cocktail of anger and disbelief. The standards they set for a child were ludicrously high, painting a portrait of sheer insensitivity. It's hardly a stretch to imagine that any hostile feelings she harbored could have been a direct response to their apparent rejection and demeaning demeanor. Their interactions with her were marred by palpable disdain and skepticism, almost inviting a tumultuous reaction. What else could be expected under such oppressive conditions? Moreover, the narrative often overlooks a critical aspect: the complex emotional landscape of adopted children, particularly those not adopted as infants. It's not just a new home they're adjusting to. They're navigating a labyrinth of pre-existing emotional imprints. Research underscores that children tend to project their past relational blueprints onto new caregivers. So, if their early relational experiences were marred by instability or negativity, they might already be predisposed to insecure attachment patterns by the time they enter an adoptive home. The nuances of these emotional dynamics are crucial, yet often sidelined in discussions about adoption and behavior. To top it all, she was also from a whole different culture and geographical location had a different language. She was from Ukraine, and she had turned age 6 by the time she was here, the age when toddlers tend to differentiate and find a voice of their own, find agency of their own, and speak for themselves and talk back at their parents. Natalia's journey, a relentless passage from one traumatic chapter to another, is heartbreaking. The audacity of those who mistreated her, casting themselves as victims in the shadow of a child's perpetrated malevolence, is infuriating. Christine and Michael's behavior reeks of malignant narcissism, a toxicity likely permeating their own children's lives, inflicting wounds that persist. Natalia's recourse seems clear: a legal battle to claim every cent from those who wronged her, a pursuit of justice against Michael, a figure whose lack of empathy, accountability, and courage paints him as utterly unreliable. The world, frankly, wouldn't be poorer without such egregiously flawed characters. The plight of their own children is a tale likely mirroring Natalia's in its darkness. The fact that Christine retains custody of her minor children is a notion that strains belief, casting a stark light on the failures and oversights within the system meant to protect the vulnerable. The documentary's reluctance to unequivocally highlight the indisputable medical evidence, her open growth plates, and the presence of baby teeth in 2010 is bewildering. Such clear indicators render the notion of her being 20 years old at the time, regardless of her condition, utterly implausible and medically unfounded. Venturing into this discussion for other reasons, I stumbled upon a trove of intriguing comments. With the release of Part 2, it's undeniable that the narrative eventually acknowledges her as a victim of abuse. Yet my critique lies with the initial episodes of Part 1, which seem to unduly amplify the narrative spun by the abusive parents, painting them as beleaguered victims ensnared in a dire predicament. It's as if the series initially choreographed its timeline and accounts to corroborate the parents' fabricated tale before gradually unraveling the truth. The most glaring oversight, in my view, is the prolonged delay in presenting Natalia's perspective. Despite the network's initial assurances of a summer 23 release, various factors led to a significant postponement. It strikes me as profoundly unfair that one narrative dominated the discourse for an extended period, while Natalia's account was left in the wings for an additional half a year, impacting the quality of her life. The story, as it first unfolded, lacked the balance of a truly comprehensive, both sides of the story approach expected from usual documentaries. One can only hope that this staggered airing was a collective decision agreed upon by all parties involved, including Natalia, along with the consequences explained to her in great detail and tools provided to her to handle those consequences. It's deeply regrettable that even momentarily some viewed Natalia, a disabled, abused child, through a critical lens. While the series undoubtedly took viewers on a riveting emotional journey, the paramount concern remains that its production and release did not further victimize the true victim of this distressing saga. A comprehensive dental X-ray could have unveiled a wealth of information decisively addressing the swirling uncertainties. Indeed, such diagnostic evidence was available and unmistakably corroborated her childhood. Multiple medical professionals emphatically informed the Barnetts of her true age based on these findings. Furthermore, photographic evidence from her arrival in the U.S. speaks volumes. A particular image captures her beaming her 2 lower baby teeth conspicuously absent, a snapshot that could be straight out of a first-grade yearbook. Subsequent photos capturing her with a set of adult teeth chronicle the natural developmental progression typical of a child aged between 6 and 8 years. These images, in their simple eloquence, bolster the narrative of her experiencing the customary growth phases of early childhood during her time with the Barnetts. This case leaves me deeply unsettled. The actions of the Barnett parents border on malevolence, subjecting the girl to unspeakable hardships. It's disheartening to see the collective failure of the system meant to protect her, and equally bewildering is the persistence of some in clinging to the sensationalist narrative that negates her childhood. As for the Barnett's claim regarding her physical development, the visual evidence tells a different story. Early photos and videos distinctly show the absence of developed breasts, contradicting their account. It's only in later imagery that we observe the natural progression of physical development consistent with the age documented in her adoption papers, a clear testament of her actual stages of growth during her time with the Barnetts. It's noteworthy that Natalia's condition is frequently pinpointed as reactive attachment disorder, RAD, a diagnosis that, although rare, appears with higher frequency among children with backgrounds in orphanages or foster care. This heightened prevalence is compounded by the fact that the true incidence of RAD is difficult to gauge, largely because children in such systems often lack adequate access to premier mental health services. The narrative surrounding Natalia's case might shift significantly if there was a broader comprehension of the gravity of RAD. Acknowledged as one of the most severe forms of attachment disorder, unfortunately, the documentary didn't quite succeed in elucidating the profound complexities and implications of this condition, leaving viewers without a full appreciation of the challenges it presents. The gravity of reactive attachment disorder, RAD, is often underestimated. It's common knowledge that infants and young children require nurturing and comfort, yet the critical nature of these needs is not universally understood. Pioneering research by Reen Spitz in the 1940s starkly demonstrated this, contrasting the development of infants in two distinct environments. One being an orphanage where infants experienced minimal human interaction beyond basic survival needs, and the other a prison nursery where incarcerated mothers maintained daily contact with their infants. The findings were stark. Infants in the isolated setting exhibited profound developmental delays, both mentally and physically, with growth, weight, and motor skills significantly compromised. Tragically, some infants in this group succumbed. Contextually, it's worth noting that during the early 1900s, a heightened fear of germs led to such isolation practices under the misguided belief that minimal contact would shield infants from disease, despite persistently high mortality rates. Subsequent research has consistently affirmed that the absence of affection and interaction inflicts lasting detriment on infants. RAD emerges from conditions reminiscent of those described. There's a consensus around critical developmental windows, often spanning from infancy up to around 6 years, where foundational aspects of our development are shaped. This period is pivotal for the formation of key elements such as temperament, motor skills, and notably attachment patterns. Individuals affected by RAD may be unaware of the extent of their early neglect. Common risk factors include infants being isolated for prolonged periods, remaining in soiled diapers, enduring unattended crying, or experiencing a general lack of affection. The repercussions of such neglect are profound, often manifesting as an array of unhealthy and detrimental behaviors. These stem from a distorted perception of attachment, self-worth, and the ability to form healthy relationships with others. Until 2013, disinhibited social engagement disorder, DSED, was categorized under RAD, but has since been recognized as a distinct diagnosis. Given the time frame of her diagnosis, it's plausible that Natalia's apparent lack of personal boundaries and her intense, sometimes invasive, attachment to acquaintances after relocating, with frequent calls, unexpected visits, a need to monitor others' whereabouts, etc., could be attributed to DSED. Such behavior is a recognized symptom of the disorder and often arises from a backdrop of neglect or abuse. Other behaviors frequently observed in RAD include tendency to fabricate stories, propensity for theft, holding delusional beliefs, unprovoked aggressive outbursts, sometimes followed by memory lapses, deep seated mistrust, an inappropriate focus on sexual matters, making them vulnerable to exploitation, overly dramatic expressions, of magnetism towards conflict or other forms of attention seeking behavior, proneness to impulsive actions, abrupt emotional withdrawal or detachment. Engaging with children affected by these conditions is known to be immensely challenging, both for caregivers and professionals. It demands an extraordinary amount of patience and energy, often leaving those involved feeling drained. However, it's worth reflecting on the perspective of these children. Imagine the impact of being perceived as burdensome by everyone in your surroundings. It's tragically simple to marginalize a victim whose behavior may seem intolerable or detrimental by conventional norms. This conduct isn't advantageous for individuals with RAD. It's a manifestation of their underdeveloped coping mechanisms and relational frameworks. Lacking the right support and intervention, many of these children transition into adulthood grappling with the inability to forge meaningful connections. This struggle is a direct consequence of the systemic failures they encountered during their most formative and defenseless years. Natalia's journey ahead may perpetually be shadowed by these challenges. She embodies the perfect, imperfect victim, a young individual who, as the documentary's conclusion suggests, continues to be let down. The ease with which many dismiss or find fault with her, deeming her behavior peculiar or disagreeable, serves to invalidate her experiences. This, regrettably, adds another layer to her struggles, as she may never receive the basic empathy often afforded to victims who conform to conventional victim stereotypes. The series itself seems more an exercise in exploitation than a genuine documentary. Rather than enlightening or informing, it appears to prioritize sensationalism and profit, a disservice to the gravity of the subject matter. The profound impact of early childhood experiences became starkly clear to me, especially after becoming a mother myself. Once holding the naive belief that infants, in their obliviousness, remain unaffected by neglect, I've come to understand the stark reality now. Even infants, mere months old, can learn the futility of their cries for attention, leading to lifelong consequences stemming from just a brief period of neglect during those formative months. Natalia's early years in the orphanage likely involved significant neglect. Furthermore, children subjected to abuse, including sexual abuse, during their pre-verbal stage may never fully recall or comprehend the events due to their inability to verbalize at the time. The production team's approach to this narrative is deeply regrettable. Converting the suffering and neglect of a young, vulnerable, and disabled child into a sensational drama is reprehensible. The initial series disproportionately spotlighted Michael, painting a misleading portrait of Natalia as a manipulative adult rather than the mistreated child she was. Natalia's need to participate in a second series to rectify the misconceptions of her story is unfortunate. Without her intervention, the Barnett's version might have remained unchallenged. It would have been prudent for the production to involve psychologists and adoption experts not only to bolster Natalia's narrative but also to enlighten the audience of the complexities of such cases. The intricacies of adoption and early life trauma are multifaceted and crucial for public awareness. Regrettably, even the documentary's second installment seems to dabble in exploitation, with the revelations confirming Natalia's status as a young child wrongfully reclassified in age. The series had a prime opportunity to pivot towards a meticulous exploration of the facts. Instead, it veered into further sensationalism, granting disproportionate attention to Michael's theatrical persona rather than delving into the core truths. The series downplayed the frequent shifts in Michael's narrative and the pivotal nature of these inconsistencies. It opted for the allure of ambiguous storytelling, maintaining a he said, she said tension and hinting at unresolved mysteries, rather than presenting the case with the straightforward clarity it warranted. A telling instance involves Michael's claim of Natalia standing at the foot of his bed, knife in hand, a chilling image indeed. I opened my eyes and there was Natalia, right at the foot of my bed with a knife. Yet, when Natalia questioned the plausibility based on her stature compared to the bed's height, Michael's narrative suddenly shifted. Now Natalia was positioned 7 or 8 feet from the bed's edge, still brandishing a knife. This shift in his account essentially discredits his initial claim. Intriguingly, in neither version does he describe any immediate reaction to disarm Natalia. No leaping from the bed, no confronting the alleged threat. The real puzzle, it seems, is why Michael's purported reaction was seemingly to dismiss the incident and return to slumber. Absolutely, even granting the Barnetts the benefit of doubt regarding their account, their predicament elicits little sympathy. The decision to adopt a child from a foreign land, a whole another culture, seemingly driven by personal motives, followed by astonishment over potential behavioral challenges, strikes a note of naivety or ill preparedness at best. The case prompts a thorough reassessment of the American adoption framework. In contrast, the UK system subjects potential adopters to rigorous training, ensuring they are well versed in the complexities of early life trauma and behaviors like aggression, incontinence, and inappropriate sexual conduct. Candidates are thoroughly vetted before being deemed fit for adoption. Hence, the situation begs the question: did the American system fail to impart these crucial insights to the Barnetts, or did they choose to disregard the education they received? The peculiarity of the situation is compounded. Moreover, considering this was a private adoption, the level of preparatory guidance they received becomes even more dubious. The oversight and regulation of private adoptions remains nebulous areas, raising questions about the adequacy and enforcement of standards. Regarding Natalia's arrival in the United States, her pathway is clear. She was brought over by her initial adoptive parents, Gary and Dylan Lee Puma Chacon, from New Hampshire in July 2008. Upon arrival with an IR-3 visa following her adoption in Ukraine, she was immediately granted American citizenship, a detail that underscores her official transition and the legal intricacies of her situation. RAD isn't a diagnosis casually derived from parental accounts. If it was diagnosed, it's because the symptoms presented were distinct and couldn't be easily dismissed as general childhood issues. It's not a label thrown around lightly. If it were, the diagnosis would be far more common, given the frequency with which parents consult doctors about challenging behaviors. RAD's rarity underscores its specific criteria, suggesting that during her clinical evaluation, Natalia likely demonstrated behaviors consistent with the diagnosis. Moreover, the diagnosing physician did contemplate a range of potential diagnoses, indicating a thorough and considered approach. Awareness of abuse or neglect in a child's history would typically trigger an immediate protective response. Casting doubt on Natalia's credibility based on her RAD diagnosis reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the condition. This underscores the significance of educating oneself about RAD, particularly when engaging in public discourse about such sensitive and complex cases. Leveraging a diagnosis to undermine Natalia reflects a broader societal issue that won't be resolved by denying the possibility of her having RAD. It's entirely plausible that she has RAD, and even if not, it's reasonable to assume she's experienced some form of trauma or mental health challenges that could be misused to discredit her. A current re-diagnosis, even if it aligns with the lawyer's portrayal, doesn't invalidate her experiences or her narrative. Understanding the potential influence of RAD on her life, recognizing that it doesn't undermine her credibility, and acknowledging the inappropriateness of dismissals based on such a diagnosis or associated behaviors are all crucial. However, the likelihood of fully unraveling the complexities of her condition diminishes as she ages. The manifestations of RAD, like many childhood disorders, becomes less distinct in adulthood, blurring the lines of causality. What remains certain is her previous diagnosis of RAD, the high probability of neglect and abuse during her formative years, and some reports of aggressive behavior not solely from the Barnetts, which align with characteristics observed in RAD. While the diagnosis isn't irrefutable, it serves as a valuable lens through which to understand her story and foster a broader societal comprehension of RAD. That's all from me today, everyone. Talk to you another time on another video. Peace out.